Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. On this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of werewolf horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. He howls at the moon, but he's no werewolf. I live in a small village called Mileham in Norfolk. It's a nice, quiet place, but it doesn't have much going for it. Honestly, I like it this way. I never grow tired of the scenic, countryside beauty, unblemished by the modern world. Mileham is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A one-pub town, as they say. The area doesn't attract too many tourists, which, again, is fine by me. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's the thought of us trying to cater to strangers. No, I'm not xenophobic. If you want to visit Mileham, I'll gladly open my home to you. Hell, I'll even buy you a drink and spend the evening sharing stories. What I don't want are droves of tourists flooding the area and the village trying to remodel itself and build new establishments to accommodate. I live here because it's quiet. If I wanted to navigate through clusters of tourists taking selfies, I'd move to London, but I digress. Mileham is and always will be my home, but there's one thing about it that disturbs me. One thing you won't find in the papers or in those little United Kingdom tourist pamphlets. We have a history of people who've exhibited a rather strange set of behaviors. Aaron Cox. He was the latest victim of the affliction that has quietly plagued my village since the 1700s. No one knows exactly when it started, only that it's as much ingrained in our history as fibers are ingrained in a tapestry. It always starts the same way. Chickens go missing, cows are found mutilated, and then someone breaks. This time, Aaron was the one who broke. I found him naked in my field one night, staring up at the sky and howling at the full moon. He had a wild look in his eyes. I dared not approach him, unsure of what to do. The village hadn't experienced this affliction since my parents' generation. I stood idly by and watched him from beyond an irrigation channel. Then, when the moon became masked behind a mass of clouds, he slowly walked away, as though nothing had happened. At the time, I had hoped it was nothing but drunken shenanigans, but I became more concerned the next day when I saw his wife Elizabeth and asked if he'd gotten home all right. When I told her about the encounter, she grew more agitated. She dodged my questions, claimed he'd been out of town, and excused herself. Somehow, I had a feeling she knew more than she let on. That very same night, I heard the howling again. It echoed through the valley, giving the impression of multiple voices from different sources. Aaron was outside, staring up at the sky and waving his arms like a drowning man hailing a ship. He switched between mad laughter and eerie yowls, as though conversing with an unseen presence. I closed my shutters and tried to sleep, ignoring the ruckus outside. It only occurred to me in the morning to call his wife. When I finally did, she sounded flustered. She told me Aaron had come home that afternoon, said he'd acted perfectly normal. They'd gone to bed together, and in bed, they remained until the morning. The hairs at the back of my neck stood. Was she lying to me, or was it the truth? If Aaron hadn't been in the field, then who had? That day, I asked around town if anyone had gone missing, and if anyone had heard or seen the man in my field. No one had. The Williams had lost a few chickens, but they blamed foxes. They'd found a spot in the chicken wire fence where claws or fangs had cut through to allow entry. These things happened. With nothing to go on, I gave up my search and returned to my chores. As I lay my head on my pillow, I heard a commotion coming from my barn. My cows were screaming. Have you ever heard the noise they make when you take their calves away? It's a kind of panicked, higher-pitched yowl you wouldn't ever hear in any other circumstance. Well, that was the sound they were making, only louder. and more panicked. I threw on a robe, grabbed a flashlight, and ran out into my barn. One of my cows was sprawled out in the middle of the central aisle, her throat ripped open with a jagged, messy gash. She was still breathing, still trying to emit that scream, but her sounds were muffled and gurgled. I knelt down in front of her and gently caressed her head to try and ease her pain. I wished I owned a shotgun so I could have put her out of her misery. Then I heard the crackle of dry straw coming from her stall and a pathetic little whimper. I twisted my head towards her pen and saw the outline of something curled up in the corner. I shone my light towards it. Aaron Cox twitched as the beam of light hit him. His eyes glowed like those of a cat in the night, but he was otherwise normal. There was no fur, no claws, and no fangs. Just a scrawny man in his birthday suit. He let out a howl and bolted out of the pen on all fours, disappearing into the night to do God only knows what. I could hear his howls in the distance as I tended to my cow. Before long, I was pounding on the door of the Cox household. "Elizabeth Cox," answered. She looked tired, but her hair was still in place. She hadn't gone to bed. "What's going on?" I barked angrily. She smiled nervously, shifting her weight from foot to foot. "I don't know what you're talking about. Are you all right?" "Like hell you don't. Where's Aaron? Or are you going to pretend he's in your bed again?" I asked. She stiffened and gripped the hem of her shirt. "Aaron's fine. It's none of your business." I stomped my foot on the ground. "He made it my business when he killed Betsy." Elizabeth winced. "I'm so sorry. He hasn't been himself lately." She trailed off, lowering her gaze in shame. "Was he even with you yesterday, or was that a lie?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Do you know what's going on with him?" I pressed. She paused, looking uncomfortable. She moved aside and motioned for me to follow her into the living room. I did. "It's the moon," she whispered. "The moon?" She nodded. "He said he can hear it calling to him. I know it sounds mad. Please, I don't want him to get locked up. It'll pass. I'm sure it'll pass. He's just sick. Haven't your parents ever told you about this? It happens here sometimes." Her eyebrows came together. She held her breath and tensed. "Sometimes they get better on their own." I leaned against the wall, remembering the stories my parents had told me. Stories of people going mad. Tiny outbreaks of some sort of disease, they thought. It hadn't happened in so long. It was assumed they were cases of mad cow disease of something of the sort, but back then, they hadn't had the tools to test for it yet. Could this be what was happening now? "Aaron needs to get help," I told her. She shook her head. "It'll pass, I promise. I don't want to risk him getting institutionalized. I promise. I'll keep him inside from now on." I relented. As long as he stayed away from my livestock, it didn't really matter to me what he did. Besides, I didn't want to be the one who had one of the village's beloved citizens sent to the loony bin. It would get out. People would talk. I would get shunned, and so would Elizabeth. I didn't want that for her or for me, so I promised to keep quiet. Still, I couldn't help thinking of what she said, or rather, what Aaron told had her. The moon. He said it spoke to him. I'd seen him howl to it twice now. I'd seen him so completely entranced by it that he didn't notice my presence at all. I'm sure you've heard the term lunatic before, right? Do you know the origins of the word? Lunatic comes from the Latin word luna, the moon. They used to think the moon caused mental illnesses. Something about its light keeping people awake at night, making people lose their minds. And when you think about it, is it that impossible? If the moon is strong enough to influence the tides, just imagine what it can do to the human body. Think about it. We're comprised of around 70% water. Really, It's almost silly to think that the moon can't affect us. And in Mileham, a little village so far from the bright city lights, the moon seems to glow twice as strong. What I'm trying to say is that, when I woke up early this morning with blood and chicken feathers caked on my lips, when I felt how sore my throat was, when I saw the moon shining through the clouds and felt the distant, magnetic hum it emitted, I understood. It's beautiful. The curve of it, the deep craters that scar its silver surface, they leave me with this feeling of admiration welling inside of me. They leave me with a desire, no, a need, to go outside and greet it. It shines so bright. It's so beautiful. I understand now. There's nothing wrong with getting a little moonstruck. Second story. I've researched a werewolf sighting for years. Actually, accounts I've heard vary. Some, like Rob's or Aldo's, sound more like a wercat or werbear. The moon shone into the diner, 2 days past full. I spotted its reflection in the pie cooler's glass door. Spinning my stool so I faced the plate glass window, I saw it hanging above my bearded reflection like a brilliant idea or a second bald head. Wired from my fourth cup of coffee, I tilted my head back and quietly howled, "Aruro," or Carrie elbowed me. "Knock it off, hairball. People trying to eat. Hey, you got more hair than I do." Down the counter, Sophia frowned. "You shouldn't though, Jacob. It's not respectful." That surprised me. Respectful to who? To the people who were killed. Say what? Carrie said. What people? Oh, yeah, Rob agreed, the other side of Sophia. For a few years, Drunken Tree had a bigger murder rate than Argenta. Argenta's 8 or 10 times the size of Drunken Tree Village and has a university besides. See, Sophia said, there was a werewolf here. Carrie laughed. Aroo. By now Sophia's frown tightened half her throat. I'm serious. Shut up and listen, would ya? Okay, sorry. There were a bunch of people in here one night, and a guy comes in. He orders 3 hamburgers and sits down. But people hear him growling, and all of a sudden he sprouts hair and claws and shit. What was he taking? I asked, rubbing my smooth scalp. I could use some of it. If I'd had any hair, Sophia's glare would have shriveled it. Y'all think this is a joke. It's not. People died. People die every day, Soph, Carrie said. Just tell your story. Wait, was it a full moon? That's what I heard. Well, first he clawed up the cook, because his burgers took too long. Then everybody started trying to run out the door, and they got all jammed up. And the werewolf ripped off a guy's head, and the rest of the people broke the doors out. He chased them into the street and killed a girl there. Wow, Carrie said, subdued. I didn't know. 2 people died, and the cook was crippled, and some other people got sort of trampled. And the werewolf ran off, and nobody ever figured out who he was. Carrie picked up a French fry, looked at the ketchup, laid it down again. That's messed up. I had to agree. I'd researched that night for years and never heard a more garbled version. Rob also agreed, it turned out. Geez, Sophia, you got nearly everything wrong. I started to worry the frown would freeze on her face. What do you know about it? She asked. More in you. I was here. I heard a snort by the cash register. Sure you were. The counterman, Aldo by his name tag, had gotten interested. Half the university was here that night, if you believe everyone. He stepped closer. No offense, kid, but if 1/10 the people that say they were here really were, this place would have looked like the biggest phone booth stuffing stunt in history. Rob shrugged. I was though. So were you. And that black cook, Jerome. You used to wear a red apron. Hey, yeah, I did. That thing saved my balls that night. Jerome dropped his flipper, crawling under the counter, and I slipped on the grease and hit the fryer. Splashed hot grease all over my front. I shucked that apron faster than Gypsy Rosalie. If it hadn't been so thick, I'd probably fried my man-bits. He looked at Rob more closely. Where were you? Rob pointed down the counter's length. I'm the one who broke out that window. He leaned forward, elbows on the counter. You see. Sophia cut him off, gaping at Aldo. You saw that night, and you still work here? Why shouldn't I? I gotta work somewhere. Well, but what if he came back? Aldo chuckled. What? You think he misses our burnt sugar pie? Her voice low and throaty, Carrie said, That's why I come here. We all laughed. Seriously, though, no reason he should come back here. It's probably just an accident he was here at all, just passing through. But the memories, how can you? Sophia looked at us, baffled. They should have closed this place, she said, a little loudly, or put up a plaque or something. Oh God, Rob said. I bet you leave flowers at roadside crosses. He struck home with that. Tears flashing, Sophia said. My cousin was killed on Highway 207. My sister and I put up a cross for her. So, it's not enough your cousin's dead. You gotta make total strangers feel bad. People die Sofe. You gotta grieve and go on. It's not fair to try and make the whole world grieve. She pulled a 20 out of her purse and shoved it blindly at Carrie.
I gatego kropka.
She ran out the door, tears in her eyes. That was pretty shitty, Carrie said. Rob looked abashed. Yeah, well, I really hate those crosses. Come on, Jacob, back me up. I shook my head. I don't like those crosses. I'm not big on grief, but Carrie's right. That was shitty. I didn't mind, though. Sophia had nothing useful for me. Aldo had already cleared away Sophia's dishes and laid her check by Carrie's plate. No rush, he said. I said, so what happened that night? Carrie looked at me and shrugged. Okay, yeah, what happened? Watching for Carrie to object, Rob slid onto Sophia's stool. I was here with a girl. I can't even remember her name anymore. We were sitting over there. He pointed at a short row of two-person booths. I didn't see the guy come in. He was alone at the counter and just starts growling and snarling. And he grows these giant claws, like a bear. He stands up, and all of a sudden he's like 7 feet tall. People are screaming and running for the door. Aldo nodded. Rob went on. A big guy, biker type, tries to get the guy in a headlock. The guy just reaches behind him and rips the biker guy's belly open, like it was paper. Now, when the bear guy first stood up, he broke his stool right off the floor. Aldo interrupted. The inspector made Cliff replace all the stools after that. Said they weren't sturdy enough. Well, I'm lucky that one broke. It fell right by our booth. The bear guy and the biker were fighting, and everybody else was pushing at the front door, and I just grabbed that stool and heaved it through the side window. My date and I jumped out and ran like hell, and a bunch of people came after us. That's where the other girl was killed. She tried to jump out the window and fell on broken glass. Cut her belly open. I winced. Rob sipped his coffee. Freaky thing is, the bear guy didn't hurt anybody until the biker jumped him. He could have claimed self-defense. Ain't that how it went, Aldo? The counterman said, Be right back, and went to ring up a family. Staring at Rob, Carrie reached blindly for her soda. I took her hand and guided it. She faced me, pale and quiet, eyes wide. I shrugged. I wasn't here. That really happened? She turned back. Rob, you really saw that? Yeah. Never been so shit scared in my life. Except for the '09 tornado. Guy was a complete freak. Didn't grow hair, though. Just got huge and grew claws. That's right. No hair. Aldo was back. I'm gonna tell Darla she ought to rename this place Rashomon. I knew what he meant, but the others looked blank. Say what? Carrie said. Rashomon? The Kurosawa movie? What's Kurosawa? Rob asked. Some kind of anime? He's a movie director. Geez, you kids don't watch anything wasn't made this millennium. I didn't bother telling him I preferred Kurosawa's Stray Dog. Anyway, Rashomon's about 4 people telling the same story, only they all see it different and tell it different. Carrie got the hint. So what's your version? He ticked a finger at Rob. You didn't get so much wrong as that little girl you ran off, but you didn't get it all right either. He came in, kinda shaggy-haired but nothing freaky, with a girl, same as you. They sat at the counter. I got 'em both burgers, and they started eating, and by I notice he's looking upset. She's looking real serious, and I think, oh, she's giving him the Dear John. Next thing I know, he's out and out crying. Not out loud, but just running tears and kinda hiccuping, you know? I think. She's gonna walk out, now, but instead she puts her arms around him. And his face is just like a dam's breaking inside. He lets go this one big sob, and then his face just... He stopped at a loss. His face just grows, except that's not really it. There's more behind his face. And then he stands up. I heard the stool break, didn't know what it was, watching him. He was bigger and taller. You're right there. He must have been over 7 foot. And he's got claws. No fangs, though. Not like people said. Just the same teeth. And no new hair. Carrie grinned. Sorry, Jacob. Jerome's diving under the sink. That's when I slipped and hit the fryer. Time I got my apron off, he'd already killed the one guy and the place is nuts. I saw a guy throw the stool through the glass. That was you? That guy had black hair, all dressed in black. Rob ran a hand over his sandy hair. I was doing a goth thing then. Even had black nail polish. Dad saw me in black lipstick one day. I thought he'd had a heart attack. Well, you threw the stool, and I threw my apron over the guy's head and ducked under the counter with Jerome. We didn't stand up until we heard sirens. A couple years earlier, there'd been a shotgun under the counter, but Cliff's wife made him take it out. We stand up, and the place is empty except for 2 dead people. The one guy, I guess he did look kinda like a biker, but he worked at the hardware store. The girl, I never knew who she was. Jerome wanted to slide out the back. I made him stay and back me up. Like you'd think. The cops had a million questions. I just told him what I saw, and made Jerome do the same. They thought it was nuts, but 4 or 5 other people had come back after the cops showed up, and told the same story, more or less. He poured coffee down the counter, refilled my cup, and told Rob, there's another thing where you're wrong. He didn't have bear claws. They were more like a cat. I saw him sheathe them. The girl he'd been sitting with, he pushed her away, before the hardware guy jumped him. Then them claws popped back out, after he pushed her out of reach. He tried to protect her, but she was the girl got killed in the window. Aldo looked at me. Well, Rashomon's got 4 stories. What's yours? I wasn't there, I said. I've heard about it, made it kind of a hobby, but never heard so much detail. I never looked for you. I heard you'd quit. Guess somebody mixed up you and Jerome? Yeah, Jerome did quit, moved to Memphis. And Cliff sold the place to Darla a year later. But I'm still here. After that, there didn't seem to be any more to say. Carrie's appetite, even for burnt sugar pie, was gone. She paid her check and Sophia's, left a generous tip, out of her change, not Sophia's, and told us good night. I sat, sipping coffee, while Rob finished his onion rings. When we left, I noticed Rob left only around a 10% tip, about what I expected. We walked out together, around the corner to the gravel lot. In the cool air, the moon bright above us, I said, "Rosemary and Ginger." Was it? Rosemary and Ginger. The girl you were with, and the girl who was killed. An herb and a spice, kind of a coincidence. He looked blank, then thoughtful. Could a been Rosemary? We never went out but that once. Met at a party, split up at a massacre. He frowned, reminding me comically of Sophia. How'd you know? I met her about a year after that night. She didn't remember your name either. She never noticed you dyed your hair. I've been looking for a black-haired guy all this time. I looked up Carrie, 'cause I heard Sophia knew something. I never expected to luck onto you. What? You've been collecting everybody's story. You some sort of researcher? Debunker? He scoffed. You got a blog? No, just trying to find out what happened to Ginger. I leaned against Rob's dodge. She was my best friend in high school, like a kid sister. We'd probably got married, but turned out we were both gay. Rob stiffened and pulled away. Oh, relax, numbnuts. I'm not gonna rape you in the parking lot. Geez, the whole world revolves around you, doesn't it? He managed to look a little shamefaced. So she went to college and I went to work, and I didn't see her for a couple of years, just talked on the phone every week or two. I could sense Rob's impatience. What's this got to do with me? Then something really bad happened to me, and I needed to talk about it. I called her, and we made a date to meet here. I showed up late. You said you weren't here. The first trace of fear was in his voice. I can tell lies too. I saw the two hit him. I'm going bald anyway, but I shaved my head and grew a beard when I started researching, in case anybody remembered me here. In your case, it's wasted effort. You're too self-centered, self-important to remember me. Was it you? He looked up at the moon, 2 days past full. I never hurt you, man. Ginger and I were at the counter. I told her I'd lost a month of my life. I still don't know what happened. One day it was middle of June and I'm at home. The next it's nearly the end of July. And all I remember in between is something like a long, restless night with a lot of weird dreams. My phone's gone, and I'm miles from home in torn-up clothes. And there was something else wrong, something I couldn't talk to anybody about. So I called Ginger. And we're here at the counter, and I start crying 'cause it hurts so much to talk about, and that triggers the change. He swallowed. Not the moon. No, grief. Nobody loves me. Dog ran away. Mom just died heartache. I shrugged. Like I said before, I'm not big on grief. I'm more the bottle everything up sort, long as I can remember. But Ginger put her arms around me, and boom. I could hardly hear him. He'd grown so breathless. Why are you telling me this? Rosemary told a different version of the story. For one thing, you ran off and left her for the monster to eat. And she couldn't remember your name, so she never said anything to the cops about how Ginger died. But when I found her, she told me. She saw me change and saw you throw the stool. She saw me push Ginger back, out of harm's way, and she saw you grab Ginger and push her across the window frame, across the broken glass, so you could use her as a stepping stone to get out. He was trembling from head to foot. I smelled where he'd soiled his pants. Okay, Ginger, I thought. I can be sad, now. I thought about my friend, about how much we'd shared. I thought about her embracing me that last night, and felt tears begin to sting. God, Ginger, I cried out, I miss you so much. Sometimes, it's necessary to let the grief out. Third story, full moon blues. I didn't think that this night would get any more annoying, but sure as shit, I was wrong. I don't blame anyone, only myself. That hopeful optimism has brought me nothing but disappointment my entire life. Imagine being a kid and thinking that the whole world was at your fingertips, ready to be conquered, explored, and becoming self-sufficient. Then the future comes and here you are, 26 years old, stuck in the same place that you always swore that you would escape. I have a modest job. I make just shy of $3,000 a month, which isn't a lot, but it pays the bills, rent, and allows me a couple nights out of the month to indulge in some of the more humanly pleasures. Unfortunately, here in Sunset Springs, the humanly pleasure are limited. We have one bowling alley that's a pretty big hot spot, the Sunset Springs Slaughterhouse. This was originally a place to butcher cattle, but the folks that bought it didn't feel like changing the sign. So yeah, then there's the reservoir. I highly suggest going there if you like smoking weed and stepping on used condoms. After 9 p.m., you are stuck with 3 options for entertainment. You can go to Barfly, which is a bar, but they let high school athletes in that don't even make an effort to look like adults, so that's never an option for me. Then there's the Sunset Spot, which is full of elderly alcoholics. I'm not talking about functional drunks either. You go here when you have a drinking problem. Then there is the ever-so-reliable Jackalope Hub, which is where I was tonight. It has its share of shade within the community, but overall it's a relatively harmless place. I knocked off of work a little later than I like. As every Friday goes, some company needed a last-minute shipment that prevented me from going home with the rest of the crew. I drove the 3-ton vehicle to the drop site, unloaded their stupid garbage bags, got the signature, then started my way home. That's when Iris St. Peter decided to drop me a text to go have a drink with her. I hurried home, speeding even though I was in the work truck. I've been friends with that girl for 3 years now, and only in the past few months has she decided that she has interest in me. Unfortunately, once again for me, even though we discussed being more than friends, it seems to have somehow slowed the process down. You have one drunk make-out session in the parking lot, discuss the potential for a relationship, and then she somehow becomes more elusive. Still, I planned on taking advantage of the opportunities that the gods grant me. When I pulled the truck into the driveway, she had already left me another message. She specified that she just wanted to see me and to hurry. I told her that I was going to grab a shower and change, and that I would be with her within the next half hour. She sent another message back almost immediately, stating that I was fine to see her in what I already had on. She also said that she liked how I looked when I was dirty. I will contact a therapist at a later date on why that aroused me. I hopped out of the work truck and into my personal truck, then headed down the road to the Jackalope Hub. It's Friday, so this place was packed. A lot of people were in the same state that I was. Work clothes, basketball shorts and tank tops, or simply jeans and flannel. This isn't really the kind of town where you should feel the need to gussy up. Even Ms. Iris St. Peter was wearing a pair of denim shorts, black V-neck shirt under yellow flannel, and flip-flops. God, she's freaking beautiful without making any effort and doesn't even know it. "Hey!" she shrieked, leaping up from the bar stool and scooting her backside down slowly. She jumped up and wrapped her arms around my neck, keeping little contact with her toes on the ground. She is petite, and I am tall, but we make it work. I had to blow away some of her frizzy red hair that found its way into my face, but it was a small price to pay. She looked at me with her piercing blue eyes, which complemented the trademark St. Peter freckle pattern on her cheeks. "Nate," a voice called out over the lyrics of Tequila Little Time With You. I looked over her shoulder to the 3 bar stools that were occupied by Erica, her best friend, Jonah, Erica's something or other, and Peter, the town's mascot for selling weed and other party favors. Erica came over to me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and lifted me off the ground. I don't like when people that are smaller than me are also stronger than me. Hey, what's up? I asked, with a very notable amount of disappointment in my voice. As much as I enjoyed the company of these people from time to time, I was really hoping for the night alone with Iris. Once again, this is that hopeful optimism that I really need to learn never works out for people like me. Call it my version of the Winters family curse, but I think I'm doomed to be stuck in this town miserable for the rest of my life. I still kick myself over thinking this meeting was going to work out for me. In 26 years, you'd think I'd learn. I'll skip over the details of the next hour. Just know that I had a great view of Iris talking to the other three. She barely acknowledged my existence. She was having a great time with them, but I had to sit there awkwardly, taking in larger portions of Bud Light and chain-smoking Camels, just to give myself some sort of motion. I hated to my core that ever since her and I started, whatever the fuck it is that we're doing, it's been twice as hard to keep her attention. I got up and went to the bathroom. While the Jackalope Hub was a nicer bar, I can't say the same for their bathroom. There was always highlighter yellow piss on the toilet seats, shit stains in the toilet bowl, and God help you if the roll of paper towels sitting on top of the dispenser is wet. It also wasn't uncommon to find things like empty beer bottles sitting on the floor or empty plastic shot glasses rolling around in the sink when you want to wash your hands. I developed a method of getting everything out of my pants without touching anything for the sole purpose of not having to wash my hands. Guys will understand. I left the bathroom to find one of the local drunks standing outside looking irritated. Sorry if the bathroom is for the public, dude. I barely made it out the door before he shot past me and slammed it shut behind him. I walked back over to my bar stool, only to find that it had been taken by somebody. Also, Iris and her band of misfits weren't in their stools either. I reached in front of the guy to grab my beer. When he saw what I was trying to accomplish, he made an exaggerated movement over to who I would assume was his girlfriend. Unnecessary, but appreciated. Where did Iris go? I asked Maggie, the bartender, and a good friend of ours from school. She pointed over to the back exit, which wasn't supposed to be used by customers, but there were exceptions to this rule for certain people, and Peter just so happened to be one of them due to his nature of providing the aforementioned party favors. Peter pulled some premium out, and I made them take it outside, she said, pouring a drink from her cocktail shaker into a glass on the bar. This was exactly the problems that I was having. I couldn't get this girl alone to save my life. She invites me out, ignores me, and ditches me. Yet I still show up. I don't know if it's because I'm down for a change, down for a possibility, or just plain pathetic. I know the universe isn't exactly working in my favor, but Christ, can I get anything? But I'll tell you something for sure. Nothing made me feel more pathetic than trying to push that back door open, only to have it seemingly barricaded on the other side. Then I could hear them all laughing and having a good time. What the fuck did I even show up for? My moment of self-loathing came to an abrupt halt when I could feel my pocket vibrating. I pulled my phone out and saw the contact listed as Jimmy, who is my cousin. If Neckbeard could be personified in human form, Jimmy would be that very person. It was rare that he called me up on a weekend due to the fact that he and his wife had just had a baby. We do meet up for a few days every month, but this wasn't one of those days. "What's up, man?" I asked. "Nate, where the fuck have you been?" he panted into the phone. "I came over to Jack's to grab a drink with Iris," I explained. I could hear heavy wind resistance on the other end of the phone, and he was breathing heavy. "What's wrong?" "Nate, it's fucking Brody and Stephanie Willow," he said in decreasing degrees of frequency. "What the fuck, Jimmy? What's wrong with them?" I asked. "Motherfucker, I've been trying to call you since you left the house." "Jimmy, What the actual fuck is going on? I yelled, grabbing the attention of some nearby bargoers. Nate, they got out. They ran out of the place, scattered in all directions, and I have no fucking clue where to go. What the fuck? He was referring to my brother, sister, and sister-in-law, and the one and only thing he could possibly be referring to. Wait, no, that isn't possible. It's not time. Not for another 2 weeks, I said, confused as shit. Nate, I don't know what the fuck to tell you. They're out, they're about, they're fucking loose. I pulled my phone away from my face and looked at it before putting it back up to my ear, as if that gesture was somehow going to make what he was saying make more sense. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not tonight. We kept track. All right, give me 15 minutes, I said. Make it in 10, he said before hanging up. Son of a bitch always had to get the last word in. Fuck, if I was paying more attention to my phone and not the possibility of hooking up with a girl that clearly isn't as interested in me as I thought, I might have been able to help. Naturally, you always think that a night couldn't possibly get any worse, but the second that somebody like me thinks like that, the universe throws me a curveball. I drove down to my family's property as fast as I could without trying to alarm local law enforcement, who were always out on the weekends looking for drunk drivers. I know all of the DUI checkpoints to avoid, but mostly for this purpose. It was just time that I simply didn't have to waste. Welcome to 8 p.m., everyone. I reached into the back seat of my truck and grabbed my Bowie knife and 9mm. I holstered my pistol on the right side of my waist and my knife on the left. Every few seconds I would look up, check my windows on both sides, and then carry on doing what I was doing. I leaped out of my truck and moved as quietly as I could to the back seat, leaving my driver's side door open. I opened the rear driver's side door, once again as quietly as I could, and grabbed my .30-06 by the buttstock and slid it towards me. I didn't want to have to use any of these, but fuck, how the hell else am I supposed to approach this? I turned towards the house. We're lucky as fuck that our parents left us the farmhouse on a decent-sized plot of land on the outskirts of town. Otherwise, this may be a cause for alarm. Ah fuck, this is Louisiana. Who gives a shit? I walked towards the front door, which was swung open and the screen door hanging by a single hinge. I pointed my rifle directly in front of me, keep my eyes even with the sights and maintaining awareness of the muzzle. I put my back against the wall just outside of the door, poked my head around for a peek, and then rushed into the house with my gun at the ready. I had brief flashbacks to Iraq, but honestly nothing I learned in the military could have prepared us for this one. I took a second to admire the damages that the three of them had made. The couch was tuned over, the TV was busted and laying face down on the floor. My dad's favorite recliner was ripped to shreds. Man, seeing that thing in the shape that it was in brought up some painful images in my head. He was always planted on that thing on Sundays watching the Saints game, drinking Miller Lite and smoking cigars. It was a painful sight. So painful that I had to swallow the lump in my throat. In the kitchen, the small round table was flipped on its side and 3 of the 4 wooden chairs were shattered. Yeah, it sure as shit didn't take them much to make a mess of the place. I was momentarily alarmed by a red substance on the floor by the stove, but I realized it was only pasta sauce. Either Willow or Stephanie must have been in the middle of cooking dinner when the change happened. The claw marks etched into the floor was enough to tell me that they ran into a frenzy. That isn't uncommon. The beast is theoretically caged up inside for around 27 days out of the month, so when it comes out, it's usually confused and erratic. Of course, if they were abiding by the moon cycle, we would have put them in their designated cages. This is still a mystery to me. My thoughts were interrupted by a loud noise coming from upstairs. I moved quickly, choosing to sacrifice stealth for speed. hoping to get the mess taken care of before anyone got hurt. Plus, the sound of my steel-toe boots hitting the wooden steps gave my position up in a matter of seconds. I once again held my rifle at the high ready. The last thing I wanted to do was shoot someone in my family, but once again, what the feck else am I supposed to do? Like everything else in my life, I was pretty much just winging it. As I reached the top step, the movement stopped. When the movement stopped, I stopped. If one, or God forbid more of them were in the house, I didn't stand a chance. Not without the element of surprise. I already had my contingency plan in play in case I was ambushed. Roll backwards down the stairs, drop the rifle, draw my knife. The beasts typically went for throat shots. I'd have a better chance of protecting myself at close range without the added length of my rifle. Plus, I've fallen down those stairs so many times in my childhood that I'm pretty much immune to it. As I prepared to make the charge, I noticed a .30-30 rifle laying on the ground. I looked both ways down the upstairs hallway as if I were a child trying to cross the street. I tiptoed over to the gun, as if it were going to make a damn bit of difference at this point, bent down slowly and, cocksucker. If I didn't duck when I heard the very loud and inappropriate slur, I would have easily been rendered decapitated by the large gentleman swinging a woodcutter's axe at me. I whipped my rifle around and hit him in the torso with my buttstock. Despite the force that I sent into him, he barely budged and seemed otherwise unaffected. "God damn it, Jimmy," I said, relieved that I wasn't a statistic. He flexed his shoulders backwards and snapped his back like he was popping bubble wrap. Jimmy stood even in height with me at 6 feet, but had about 80 pounds on me. He was wearing a button-up flannel, jeans, boots, and a trucker cap. He definitely looked the part to that of a Winters. There wasn't a single part of him that wasn't covered in sweat. "Shit, sorry, Nate. Mark's been poking around the roads all night." "I thought he came into the house," he said, placing the axe on the ground and grabbing the .30-30 rifle. "So, you were gonna kill him?" I asked, alluding to the fact that I was almost the equivalence of firewood. Hey, it would serve him right. That boy has been spreading conspiracies about our family for years. Devil worship, murder house, aliens. Well, I'd never tell him this, but he's not far off, I said. He doesn't know Jack. I looked around to see if I could make sense of the situation once again. The upstairs wasn't that bad. I wouldn't have guessed that they made it up here. And as Jimmy had mentioned, the three of them would have made a run for it out of the door. What the hell happened? I asked. I have no clue. Brody invited me over for dinner. Everything was fine. I was here for about an hour. We heard you pull up, but then you darted away from the house pretty fucking fast. Wasn't but a few minutes later that the three of them spazzed out. Just like that? I asked. Scared the shit out of me. They ran around downstairs in a frenzy, like, well, animals. I made it up here and locked myself in Willow's room and tried calling you. Once they broke out of the house, I ran outside to see what I could do to get them out to the stables, but they all took off in different directions. I had so many more questions to ask, but I didn't see them being important enough to ask at the moment. There was really nothing that could be done to reverse the transformation. I mean, they changed without the help of the moon, so anything was theoretically possible at this point, but I found it best to leave that question on the back burner until we rounded them all up. Fuck me, I said, wiping the sweat from my forehead on my shoulder. We need to find them. Fast. I agree, but we need Jed to come over. It would be a lot easier if he was here to monitor the trail cameras, Jimmy said. All right, call him. I'm gonna change clothes real quick. Jed is also my cousin, as well as my best friend. He is somewhat of a legend/leper in the Winters clan because he got his college degree in statistics which is unheard of for someone like us. Ever since we were kids, he's been way smarter than the rest of us. Not only that, but he managed to marry a woman from a wealthy family despite being far less attractive than her. He holds down a white-collar job and makes good money. Seeing him do his thing often gave me hope that I might be able to make something out of myself as well. I went into my bedroom and removed everything but my boxers. If I was going to be poking around in the fields all night to look for my family, then I would at least need to be dressed somewhat appropriately. I put on a green thermal shirt and threw a black t-shirt on over it. I also took a pair of jeans off the floor and threw those on. I felt my steel toe boots were probably the best to wear, so I put those back on. I also exchanged my work cap for one of my trucker-style caps and turned it backwards. It would keep the creepy crawlies out of my hair, but also allow for better visibility. I put my Bowie knife and sidearm back into their places on my belt. I also went into my closet and grabbed my carrying pouch for my ammo and attached it to my belt right behind my knife. I hated the thought of how this all might end. In a perfect world, we would be able to round them all up and put them in their cages until we could figure out what happened. As I've explained already though, this is far from a perfect world, and I don't have a stellar resume when it comes to luck. Fuck. Nate, you may want to come down here. We have a bit of a situation, Jimmy called from downstairs. I sighed. Loudly. Very loudly. I didn't even leave the bedroom before trouble came knocking. I hurried over to grab my rifle and made haste down the stairs. I got about halfway down before I noticed the red and blue lights flashing from outside, through the windows and open door. This guy could seriously never give my family any kind of peace. By the time my boots even hit the bottom floor of the house, Jimmy had already started making his way out of the open door. I made a light jog outside onto the front porch and casually walked down the front steps, still holding my rifle, but at the low ready. This guy was always hassling our family, and I knew for a fact that he would have no issues putting brass in either me or Jimmy. I admired his constant determination, but he was annoying as hell. "What do you want, Mark?" Jimmy asked. He stared Jimmy down, chewing on a piece of gum like it was concrete. He had a typical military haircut and a light pencil-thin mustache that didn't hang below his lip, which made him look like he gave zero fucks about anything. He was such a smug piece of crap. I have nothing against police, but I don't know how guys like this manage to get a job. He also wore the traditional dark blue uniform, seemingly an intentional size too small to show off his physique, which wasn't nearly as impressive as he wanted it to be. "Why don't you two boys put those weapons on the hood of my car while we talk for a second?" he asked without really asking. "No, thank you," I said very politely. That angered him. I could tell. He bit his lip and rendered himself speechless. He also started clenching his fists and inhaling really deep. I loved that we could so easily get under his skin. Instead of talking to us like men, he narrowed his eyebrows at us, keeping his left hand on his sidearm and violently pointing at the hood of his car with his right index finger. I rolled my eyes at him, smirked, but complied and placed my rifle on the hood of his cruiser. Jimmy did the same, but kept his typical Jimmy face on. "What the hell is this about, Mark? We got things to do and not a lot of time to do them," Jimmy said. "Well, you can start by addressing me as Deputy Chambers. I'm not your friend, so don't play with me like that." "Oh, Mark, get the fuck off of my property," I snapped. "Watch your fucking tongue, Nate. I'm serious. I will make both of your lives fucking miserable. I'm getting sick and fucking tired of getting these calls from neighbors complaining about the noise coming from here. I don't know what the fuck you two got going on, but I'm going to get to the bottom of it." Jimmy and I looked at each other. I looked left, then looked right. Jimmy did the exact same thing, and our gazes met each other once again. I took an exaggerated look back at the house. Jimmy got on his tiptoes to look over Deputy Doucheface. Jimmy and I concluded our point by looking at each other one more time before returning our gazes back on him. "What neighbors?" I asked. That one really stumped him. He didn't say anything. He just rubbed his eyes very intensely. "What the fuck are you two doing with rifles at this hour?" "Your fucking door is hanging from its hinges. I can see from here that inside. Your place is a fucking mess. What the fuck is going on?" "We're trying to go out and hunt for coyotes. They keep killing the cattle," Jimmy said. "Wait, what are you?"
A fucking interior designer?
I asked. "Mind your own damn business." Our conversation was interrupted by a very loud and deep howl coming from the trees. Jimmy and I jumped at the sound, but still doing our best to maintain a reasonable degree of composure. Mark didn't budge at the sound. If I had to make an educated guess, I would say it came from maybe a quarter of a mile away. The speed that they moved at was incredible, in a very frightening kind of way. "I'd like to go have a look around inside," he said, taking a step forward. "I think not," Jimmy said, placing his hand out in front of him, preventing Mark from going any further. "Move out of my way, Jimmy. This is obstruction of justice," he barked. "What justice?" "Once again, you assume that we're up to something, and this is getting to be a severe case of harass." Before I could finish my sentence, a loud trampling noise started in our direction. Before I could even turn to see what it was, the three of us were knocked onto the ground. I rolled into the dirt and eventually stopped on my back. Jimmy was face down on the ground, but was pushing himself to his feet by the time I sat up. The world seemed to stop when I heard the agonizing screams from Mark, pleading for help from anybody that would listen. "Jesus, get this fucking thing off of me." I looked over to where he was. I saw it. It had its teeth sinking into Mark's neck, shaking him furiously. For a second, it looked like he was reaching for his gun, but his body went limp not long after. His throat was torn out completely and devoured. His head was hanging on by a thread. Blood covered the entire top half of his body and bled out onto the ground. I got myself to my feet as quickly as I could while still maintaining a calm enough demeanor. Their attacks were usually provoked by movement. Keeping still was the best way to avoid being mauled. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the closest thing we've ever found to a defense tactic that didn't require violence. It stood up straight, gray fur, lightly coated with a darker mane around its canine face, with a very exposed, malnourished-looking torso. The rib cage was extremely visible. That was one of the most dangerous things about them. They were always hungry, and they were never full. Judging by the size of it, which was about 6 feet in height, I could tell it was Willow. She's always been the run of the pack. She's extremely skittish once transformed. She scares easily, which means she'll either run away or attack out of fear. At this point, neither of these options were particularly favorable. She locked eyes with me, which is something that I've always considered a death sentence. Do that to them when they're in the cage, and they'll try to rip that thing open to get to you. Thing is, she wasn't in the cage. She gave a very loud growl and got on all fours, facing my direction as pouncing motion. A shot rang out of nowhere and caused her to jet off at a high speed away from me. As she ran, she whimpered in pain. Within a few seconds, I couldn't see her or hear her. I turned to Jimmy, who had his .38 special drawn. Shit, I hated seeing my sister in pain, even if she was under the influence of something else. Thankfully, she didn't seem to be hit fatally. They have a higher tolerance for pain when they're in this state, and their ability to heal is much quicker. I guess that's the closest thing I'll ever find to a silver lining. This night is going to be hell. We need to get them back here to the farm where it's safe. They can easily fuck up anyone and anything. Not to mention that this is the South, and people don't have any problem shooting things, especially in this hunting community that we live in. I don't see this ending well, but fuck, it's going to be a long night. Fourth story. Why I sleep with my bedroom door shut. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old. They had just purchased a house together in the woods in Walker, Louisiana, which is 20 or so miles from Baton Rouge. After seeing his subsequent relationships, I realized that this is something my father does when his marriage is rocky. He sells his house and then buys or builds a new one for the sake of distraction. I've actually seen it work for him. Once engaged in a new project and excited by the possibilities, his wife might forget to ask why he was out so late, who he was with, and why he smells like another woman's perfume. But this time, his trick didn't work. My mother had had enough. I don't even think we lived in that house in the woods for a full year before my mother suggested he go stay with his whore instead. I wasn't terribly upset by this. My father and I had never been close. He was a no-nonsense high school coach, and I was bookish and skinny and weird, far from the athlete he'd wanted. Though, to be fair, he didn't try to push me into sports or pressure me to follow football. Instead, he ignored me entirely in favor of my little brother, Trent, who seemed like he was born with a ball in his hand. Trent didn't play one sport, he played all of them, starting when he was merely a toddler. I never resented either of them for this. I merely mention it to help paint a picture of my brother. If Trent and I had been one person, we'd be a very well-rounded individual. Me, precocious and dreamy and even-tempered. Trent, sporty and rough and emotional, living up very well to the reputation that came with his bright red hair even when he was still in diapers. You couldn't have two more opposite children, but we loved each other fiercely, particularly in the early years of our parents' divorce. Though there were 3 bedrooms in this house in the woods, Trent and I shared one, not wanting to be separated. That changed around the time I turned 10. I was starting to get a light dusting of very fine pubic hair as well as the weird, self-exploratory sessions that came with it. So I figured it was time I had my own room. Without so much as asking my mother, I began moving my things to the room across the hall to claim my new space. We'd been living in that house in the woods for a couple of years now, and even though it had felt large and empty in the days following my father's exile, now it felt like home, and I had claimed a new room all for myself, where I wouldn't be bothered by Trent's nightlight or those soft, irritating snuffling noises he made in his sleep. But still, though I figured I was too old for a nightlight, the inky darkness of my room when I turned my bedside lamp off was a bit too much. My mother would sleep in her room at the end of the hall with the door open, so she could hear us if we called, and she would often fall asleep watching Letterman or Seinfeld. The ghostly blue glow of the TV in her room illuminated mine just enough to pacify me, so I began sleeping with my bedroom door open. I was 10 then. I'm 30 now. I have not been able to sleep with my bedroom door open for 20 years because of what I saw standing in my room that night. I don't know what woke me. I was simply awake and I hadn't been a moment before. Everything was quiet. Everything was still. The sleep timer on my mother's TV must have clicked it off because there was no noise anywhere, not even the whir of the air conditioner, not even crickets in the woods outside. Simple, unbroken silence. I lay in bed for a while, staring at my ceiling and puzzling over why I had awoken. I realized I was very cold, even though the AC wasn't running. With a small shiver, I pulled my comforter around my shoulders and rolled on my side to face my bedroom door. And there it was. As I am typing this, a strong chill is passing through me. Even 20 years later, the thought of the thing is enough to make every hair on my body stand straight up. I've got to pee quite badly too, but don't feel like I can move until I've finished writing this and am done with it. until I push that thing out of my head. A small part of me is afraid that by writing about it tonight, I have somehow summoned it and that it will be waiting for me in the hallway when I go to empty my bladder, all terrible and white and staring. I don't know what I saw. It was tall, to a 10-year-old, anyway, and ghastly thin. It seemed to shine in the thick darkness of my room. It was so pale. Its skin seemed whiter and thinner than paper, its skull a round, hairless dome. It was naked, I think, and though I could see no genitals, I could make out the sharp ridges and curves of its hips. Its fingers, which hung limply at the end of flat, large hands like giant white spiders, seemed unusually long and alien to me. Whether or not it had a mouth or even a nose, I could not say. The darkness was too deep and the thing too white to make such distinctions. The worst part was its eyes. I could see those. Or maybe it had no eyes. Maybe those round, black holes in its face were empty sockets. Or maybe its brow was so heavy it hid them entirely in shadow. Whether they were there or not, I knew those eyes were looking at me. I froze. A scream rose up in me, but I stifled it into a nearly inaudible sob. I did not move, could not move. The thing saw me, I knew, but perhaps it didn't realize that I saw it. Maybe if I just kept pretending to be asleep, it would leave me alone. I dared not close my eyes, though. I couldn't let the thing out of my sight for a moment, lest it attempt to creep closer. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably no more than a minute or two. Neither of us moving, neither of us making a sound. Both of us just staring. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. It did not acknowledge me, did not attack me, did not make a sound except for the odd popping of its joints and the creaking of the floorboards under its feet as it strode down the hall to the kitchen. It was gone, but still, I could not move. The thing was still out there somewhere, and it was even more terrible out of sight than it was standing in front of me. At least when I could see it, I knew where it was and what it was up to. Now, my mind swam with horrific possibilities of what this thing might be capable of what kind of terrible appetites it must possess. I lay there in the dark for over an hour, fretting over this strange creature and listening to the dark, sleeping house for any sign that it was still around. But nothing came. Steeling my nerves, I took a deep breath and prepared to do the bravest thing I'd done in all my 10 years. I prepared to run to my mother. I slowly slipped out of bed, expecting the moment my feet hit the floor for the thing to snatch them, but it didn't. I stepped carefully and quietly to my bedroom door, expecting that the moment I peeked my head out, it would be there. But it wasn't. I looked left. I looked right. I looked left again. And then, in a burst of speed I didn't know I was capable of, bolted down to my mother's room. My sudden and explosive entry was enough to make her stir. "Drew," she said blearily while clicking on her bedside lamp. "Is that you? What's wrong?" "Mom, there's something in the house." I saw something looking at me. It was standing in my bedroom doorway, and it was looking at me, and I think it kind of looked like the kid from Powder, like a bald albino or something. I was so relieved to be with her and telling her what I had seen that I didn't notice the look of shock wash over her face until she grabbed me and pulled me close to her. She was wide awake now, and she looked terrified. "What did you say? Someone was standing in your doorway looking at you?" I nodded. She turned and looked over her shoulder, and that's when I realized for the first time that she wasn't alone. My brother, Trent, was asleep in bed beside her. My mother leapt out of bed and rushed to her closet, where she kept her handgun. My mother hated that thing, but she insisted on having one. A single mother with only a 10 and a 6-year-old needed to protect herself. Mom, what's wrong?" I was starting to get scared again. She snatched the cordless phone off its cradle and called my grandfather, who lived about 2 miles away. "Daddy," she whispered into receiver, "I need you to stay on the phone with me. If something happens, call the police." About an hour ago, Trent came and got in bed with me, said he couldn't sleep because somebody was standing in his bedroom doorway watching him. And now Drew just came and told me the same thing. I think somebody's in the house. I had never heard my mother so frightened. Maybe it's Tommy. Maybe it's somebody else. If it's Tommy, I'm getting a restraining order. Apparently divorce wasn't enough. "Mom, it's not Dad," I said. "It can't be. It was too thin. Dad's got a big belly." "Shoo, sweetie. Shoo." "Okay, Daddy, I'm walking through the house right now. Yes, I have my gun. Drew, follow me. If anything happens, run back here and lock the door and do not open it until Granddaddy or the police get here." "Okay." I nodded solemnly. My mother began to move down the hall, turning on light after light as she did so, checking every room, every closet. Within a couple of minutes, the whole house had been searched. Only one room left, the kitchen. My mother entered the room and flipped on the light, seeming to fully expect my father or some deranged killer to be standing there. But no, the kitchen was empty too. We were alone. We were safe. With a sigh of relief, my mother said goodbye to my grandfather and put the phone down on the kitchen counter. "Nobody here," she said. "You must have had a dream, that's all."
No, Ma.
I know when I'm dreaming. This wasn't a dream, and Trent saw it too. "Did you both watch that Powder movie recently, or something dash?" "M.O.'m," I shouted. She jumped, startled. "What? What is it?" I pointed. The kitchen door, which led out into the backyard and the thick, old woods beyond it, stood slightly ajar. I still don't know what I saw that night. I have thought about it and discussed it with my brother and my mother. In recent years, I even questioned my father about it. He wasn't doing too well for a couple of years following the divorce, was doing some weird and creepy things. But no, he hadn't been there that night. And honestly, I never thought he had. Still, I had to ask, because the alternatives are too frightening to consider. I don't suppose I'll ever know what that thing was. Maybe that's for the best. What I do know is, I haven't slept with my bedroom door open since that night. If for some reason I forget to shut it all the way before I climb in bed, I will not be able to sleep until I go and close it tight. Because now, in every dark doorway, I see that ghastly white face. I see those terrible, dark eyes, staring at me. Fifth story. I think I saw a dogman/werewolf in rural France. I would like to say first that I've always believed in paranormal things, even though it was the first time I witnessed something supernatural. Also, English isn't my first language, so I apologize for the errors I may make. So I, 18M, live in northwestern France, Normandy, and it's not a place with endless forests. It's flat and boring. Since I was a kid, I would stay for 2 weeks during the spring holidays at my grandparents' house in the Jura region in eastern France. The Jura region is a hilly place with a lot of forests and amazing wildlife, so it's the opposite of where I'm from. During my time here, I usually go deep into the woods to pick mushrooms and berries, and I never saw something weird. The animals you always see there are deer, foxes, badgers, wild boars, squirrels, rabbits, and very recently wolves have been back in this area of France. If I remember correctly, it was the 2nd of May, 2022, and as I said, I was in the forest near the village of Giron to pick berries. I was alone, there was no one around, but it was not something strange because it's a very sparsely populated part of France. The thing that felt strange was the fact that I did not see any animals. No deer, no wild boars, no foxes. It was silent. Not gonna lie, I was starting to get scared because the silence was making me uncomfortable, but I decided to keep picking berries because my mom wanted to make some pies and I love her pies. I was walking in the woods and I could see a clairiere. I think the word in English is clearing, but I'm not sure. And I was thinking about taking a break in this place because I've been walking for almost 1 hour. It was until I saw that very big and dark mass that was bipedal, and it was standing in the clearing. I stopped walking and I was staring at that thing behind the trees for like 20 seconds before running back to the village. It was very tall and hairy, probably 210 centimeters or 7 feet 0 inches for Americans. It looked like a bipedal wolf, or like a half-dog, half-human. I don't know if that thing saw me, but I did not put a foot in this forest since then. When I was back at my grandparents' house, I gave my mom the berries I picked, and I stayed in my room for the rest of the day. I made a lot of research about the wildlife in the Jura region to see if I saw some kind of rare animal, but no. What I saw was not an animal. While making the research, I stumbled across a story from the 16th century. It's the story of a werewolf that was killing children in the village of Amange in the Jura. Even though Amange is pretty far from Gironde, it's still in the Jura area, so there is a possible connection. I was freaked out by this discovery, but I wanted to know more about werewolf stories in this part of France, so I watched a 2-hour-long video about 2 women who were talking about what they saw in the Jura. When I looked at the drawing that one of the women in the video did, my heart stopped because it looked exactly like what I saw. I know that werewolves are part of the Jura folklore. There is even a celebration that takes place the last weekend of June to celebrate the story of the werewolf of Amange. Since this experience, I haven't been able to sleep well at my grandparents' house because I felt like I was being watched. The view from my window is nothing but a big forest, so it's not reassuring. I'm back in Normandy since May 9th, but I'm thinking about it every day, and now I want to go back. I didn't tell anyone about this sighting yet because I don't want to sound crazy, and I don't have any pictures to prove that I'm not lying. What do you guys think? Am I crazy? Pictures of the area that I took during my vacations.